Welcome to the USC Sea Grant Knauss Fellowship webinar. And we're so excited to have you guys here. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great lineup today. We are going to be having a presentation talking about the fellowship. We're going to be talking about the application materials, what's new about the application. We're going to be talking about how to apply, especially through USC Sea Grant, as well as some other fellowships you may be interested in. We have an awesome panel of 4 previous Canals Fellows that are going to be sharing some of their experiences and takeaways. And then we have plenty of time that we're going to open up for a Q&A session to answer all your questions. So we are going to be recording this and we're going to be sending out the recording after the event along with the webinar slides. So you'll have all the links as resources. So I just ask, we have you guys muted right now. If you can just stay on mute during the presentation section. And then when we have the Q&A, feel free to unmute and we can have engagement through asking questions either through there or the chat box. So, all right, let's get started. So I'm going to pass it over to our Associate Director, Phyllis Griffman, who's going to start talking about Sea Grant and the fellowship.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'll add my thanks to Leah's for coming this afternoon to learn about the Canals Fellowship and meet us. Sea Grant, if you don't know, is a partnership of academia, government, and industry. We focus on coastal marine resources, and it's a university-based network. It's meant to bring academic research to the decision makers at the state, federal, and regional levels who need the relevant science information for smart decision making. Base funding comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Department of Commerce. So nationally, Sea Grant is a national network of researchers and educators. And the sort of mantra is better understanding, more informed use of coastal ocean and Great Lakes resources. That's slide 3. So Sea Grant was created from the National Sea Grant College and Program Act of 1966, which authorized the establishment of Sea Grant colleges and programs. The structure of Sea Grant is this sort of 3-legged stool where research, education, and extension mutually feed each other. It is a very robust network of not only researchers, but also the Sea Grant Extension Core is the sort of heart of the program, where unlike some other science funding programs, Sea Grant demands that results of research go where they're needed. So it's relevant science, and it makes sure that all of these forces are sort of brought together to solve the most urgent coastal problems. Coastal and Great Lakes, I should say. So there are 34 Sea Grant programs, 1 in every coastal and Great Lakes state and in Puerto Rico and Guam. It's, again, Sea Grant research, outreach, and education for sustainable use and sustainable economies, coastal economies. You're going to hear us say this a few times. In California, there are 2 Sea Grant programs. There is the program that we're at USC in Los Angeles. We're one of the smallest programs in the network. We were created in 1971. And we have a very unique focus among the Sea Grant programs. We do exclusively work having to do with the juxtaposition of millions of people on the ocean and in the urban context. The other program in California is California Sea Grant, which was created in 1973. It's the largest of the 34 programs. It's based at Scripps. We're very complementary programs, and you will have your choice of which program you choose to apply through. And for that reason, we're going to mention that we have 2 programs and what the differences are a few times, just to allay any kind of confusion that there might be. So our mission is really to provide the integrated research, outreach, and education for California to sort of balance coastal marine interests, adapt to changing conditions and needs. And one of our biggest adaptations has been our adaptation to the fact that climate change permeates nearly everything that we do at this point. We collaborate, you should go backwards one slide. We collaborate with local, state, tribal, regional, national, and even international partners. We fund research. Every other year, we put out a call for research projects. And along with the results of those projects is our extension program, and then our very robust marine science, STEAM, education, science literacy program. Our program, it does the lion's share of that kind of establishment of strong education programs for California. I think that's that. Oh, the focus areas. So you can see on this screen, these are the focus areas. They're set out by the national office in its strategic plan. They're working on the strategic plan. All the Sea Grant programs, including the National Sea Grant Office, are going to be working on strategic planning for the next year. And it's very likely that if you're accepted as Canals Fellows, and if you end up at the national office, you'll be working on the strategic plan there. And some people think that strategic planning is just drudge, but actually it's really exciting because you're setting the stage for what comes next in a program that has tentacles throughout the nation. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Knauss Fellowship. So it was established in 1979 by Dean John Knauss at the University of Rhode Island. He was the Sea Grant director there. It provides quite a unique and prestigious experience to students interested in policy, making policy, developing agendas, and those with an eye toward future work in this field. It's a one-paid fellowship, includes healthcare. There's a larger number of executive fellows. In other words, those are the fellows that are put in agencies, who are assigned to work in agencies, not only in NOAA, but in other federal government offices. And eligible students are MS, PhD, JD students. You have to be a student when you apply, but you can be finished by the time you accept your fellowship. Each of the programs can nominate 6 people from the state. So in California, we can nominate 6 people. California Sea Grant can nominate 6 people, which gives us a little advantage, but in real life, there are so many more Sea Grant programs in the Gulf and East Coast that it just kind of, it helps our numbers to be representing California. If you're not in a Sea Grant state, you can still apply for a fellowship. You have to get a letter from the national office to do that. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to our extension science policy, research policy and science expert, Amelia Almada, to talk about application. And Amelia is a former Knauss Fellow, so she knows this stuff pretty well. So Amelia.
Awesome. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Really excited to share a little bit more about the application materials, kind of give some tips that have been conveyed to us from the national office, as well as from having run the Knauss Fellowship for several years through USC Sea Grant. So we've kind of collated our tips and tricks here, and we'll be sending additional resources afterwards. But I'm just going to run through the specific materials and again, point you to resources to look at after this webinar. I first want to mention that there are several changes to the application this year. There are a few new statement prompts, essay prompts. Transcripts are no longer scored as part of the evaluation, which is a big change. And finally, the relative weight and scoring of different sections has changed. I'll talk about that on the next slide, give the breakdown of how each section is weighted and scored. But first, I want to walk through these application materials that you'll be sending to USC Sea Grant by the deadline of February 18th. Again, some of these tips are given from the national office, which is great. They've created some new resources this year, again, that so explicitly spell out what the evaluation criteria are. I can't emphasize enough to really read through those thoroughly before you sit down to start the application. So starting with the CV, the max length for this is 2 pages. They're really looking to have you highlight leadership roles that you've had, to highlight the breadth of experiences that you've had, particularly those that you can showcase are relevant to serving the American people, which again, as Phyllis described, is an important mission of the Sea Grant program, showing kind of connection to public service. Also highlighting specific achievements you think are relevant to the Knauss program. If you have it, point to experience with policy or communication skills in your CV. Again, experience outside of the university and academics is important and valued. Well-rounded experience is valued. So don't feel you just have to show academic work, but this communication skills, kind of other professional experience is important to highlight as well. For CVs in general, keeping the language simple, clear, and active is really important. Find as many people as you can to proofread. I think it's easy to find little errors in each read through, so please just take the time and attention to proofread that. So the personal education and career development response, I have a separate slide to talk about this more in detail, since this section is really the meat of the application. This section has 3 separate prompts or sections within it. It's a max of 1,500 words for all statements. And really important not to just repeat your CV here. We want to see a compelling narrative about your abilities and experience, both academic and life experience. This is also where you'll kind of extend that to talk about your expectations from the fellowship, how it will support your career development. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that in 2 slides from now. Letters of recommendation. There'll be 2 letters of recommendation that you'll submit. Leah will talk about how to do that through our online portal so that it's confidential, so that your letters of rec can send that confidentially. One of those letters of rec should come from your faculty advisor, and the other should be from individuals who know you and what you have accomplished, who can write you a strong letter about your qualifications, character, and why you would be a great fit for the Knauss. Be sure to also give your letter writers about 4 to 6 weeks notice to write the letter. So that's coming soon with the February 18th deadline. So really start thinking about who those letters of rec could be. And some of the resources from the national office that we'll send after this has some great guidance for applicants about how to best approach and prepare letter writers to write these strong letters of rec. So giving you a little preview of what they recommend, but again, point to that resource after this webinar. So transcripts, again, this is a big change this year, that transcripts aren't used as part of the evaluation process, but these transcripts are still needed. We need to confirm that you're currently enrolled in a graduate program at the time of application to the Knauss, but unofficial transcripts are okay. Relevant coursework and future plans. This is 1 page long. This is an opportunity to discuss what specific coursework you've done, to highlight within the transcript those classes that you think were relevant to your success in the Knauss program. Those are either completed courses or ones in progress. It's also asked that you talk about future year activities. So that can include classes or activities like leadership roles, volunteer, extracurricular, employment activities that will help fill any gaps in your preparation for the Knauss. So one thing to note there is often thinking about how you are building on kind of your policy and communication experience through coursework or through activities that you have pursued or hope to pursue in this next year. All right, so next slide, talking about evaluation criteria. Again, this slide is just to showcase the relative weight of the different components of the application. Again, you'll see the meat of it is really around these personal education and career development responses. This USC Sea Grant Director Letter of Recommendation that comes together after all your applications come in, and we evaluate, interview, and then nominate 6 applicants to go to the national evaluation round. So that's not relevant for this February 18th deadline. But I want to point to this section of overall cohesion that's listed here. This is a new component for evaluation this year and worth 10 points, which is fairly significant. And the purpose of this is to really see how, as a whole, this application and the different components of it are complementary, especially the CV and the personal written statements should not be exactly the same. We want to see that you are using the different opportunities and statements and components to build on each other, but not just kind of using the same information over and over again. All right, and last thing on this slide, the national office is very explicit about word counts and the questions they want answered. So I can't stress enough just reading and rereading and rereading again the guidelines before you prepare to submit. Okay, and lastly from me, I wanted to take a moment to get into this, again, this meaty part of the personal education and career development response. This is comprised of 3 separate sections. One, the icebreaker, career path and objectives, and career path experience. So the icebreaker has 2 prompts. They ask to use 1 sentence to describe yourself, and the second is to list 5 objectives that someone with a close personal connection would use to describe you. So this is really meant to be a more fun opportunity to see your creative thinking and your willingness to think outside the box. There are very specific word limits for this section as well, just to keep note of. The career path and objective section has 3 separate prompts, but for this part, those 3 prompts within career path and objectives can be combined into 1 written personal statement. So these prompts are really probing your career goals, how the Knauss would support these career goals, what transferable skills you would bring to the fellowship, and how your prior experiences support or relate to the mission of Sea Grant. So some general tips for this section: you again want to create a cohesive story that is tight and engaging. So when I say tight, we want you to get to the point as quickly as you can, keep really focused. Again, the panel has a short time to spend on each application. So we want it short and tight. A recommendation that I have seen in several applications that were successful is to share a relevant pivotal moment or moments that help reviewers see and understand your interests in marine and coastal policy, kind of your aha moment or moments that have guided you on your professional path, and really make clear to reviewers why you should be chosen for this fellowship. What is unique about you and your story and your career path? And again, do not repeat your CV. This is meant to complement. You can provide clarity on where the CV might seem disjointed or help fill in gaps with this narrative. And I think it's important to note too that a good personal statement looks backward and forward. You need to devote space about what you would like to do and demonstrate how the fellowship is aligned with your career goals, and talk about how being a fellow will help you have impact in your career goals. As someone reading a lot of applications, this is also really important. We want to see your drive and purpose, have that come across. We want people who are excited and who value the Knauss opportunity and to demonstrate how it will be life-changing for you. This has been true in years past, and I was given this recommendation when I applied as well, not to state a preference for either the executive or legislative placement in your statements. Totally okay to talk about that with the Sea Grant director during the interview process, and they can talk about this in their letter, but not to be super explicit about that. Okay, almost wrapping up here, but this career path experience section has 2 prompts that need to be addressed separately. The first prompt talks about highlighting how you've engaged with diverse community members and or interested partners, and or how you would be an ambassador for principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. So really want to see you showcase what principles of DEIJ mean to you and how they have or will guide your work. So this can either be sharing personal examples or talking about in the future how you would bring these forward. The second prompt is to discuss a situation in which you overcame a challenge, either personally or professionally as it relates to a professional role, and reflect on what was learned. So here really looking for a story of leadership and creative problem solving, think about challenges that they could be interpersonal, they could be institutional, societal, personal, whatever is a compelling story for you of overcoming challenges and showcasing your leadership. So I'll stop there quickly. I want to give Phyllis an opportunity or Leah an opportunity if there's anything important I've missed in terms of tips and tricks at this stage.
I think you did a great job. We can also, during our Q&A, talk a little bit more. If our panelists have any more tips and tricks, we can talk about that.
Sounds great.
Well.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks, Leah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. We are now going to move on to talk about, now that we know the application materials, how can we apply, especially through our program, USC Sea Grant. So for those of you who have been aware of our program and how we have done the application process in the past, it used to be through email, but we're really excited to share this year we have moved all applications online through our online submission portal, Sea Grant. And these are just 2 quick contact quotes here, is that email Phyllis Griffman or Amelia, and I'll have information on the last slide for any information about questions when you're applying for the fellowship. But then if you have any Sea Grant portal questions when you're actually trying to submit, you can email me. So first, when you have to go to USC Sea Grant, Sea Grant website, which I have here, and you'll have the link to it when I send out the slides. You have to create your username and password. And after you register, it will take you to your home screen, which will look like this. You'll have current tasks. Under there, you're going to want to look under fellowship applications. And for us, it'll be the only one for the next month. So it'll be the 2023 Knauss Fellowship. It'll be easy to find, and then click Add Fellowship Application. What's nice about this application portal is that you can go in, start it, save it, leave it, come back, and just come to this homepage, and you can keep editing it until the deadline. So it's really accessible for you guys to work on. Once you go into the application, you'll have 8 required sections and 1 voluntary section on the left-hand side. They're all fairly self-explanatory. We have a lot of directions and guidance in there for what you need to submit. And again, if you have any questions on this, please email me, Amelia, or Phyllis. One of these, though, I want to highlight today is, as Amelia mentioned, the letters of recommendation. This is the most involved of all of these. So you have 2 sections here. The first one, I won't highlight that. It's easy. You just you tell us the name, the affiliation, and the email of your 2 letter writers. But this next one, the letters, when you request letters of recommendation, This is a bit more involved. So this is where I want to kind of take you through the steps to show you what you'll be doing. So you have, when you click on it, you'll see this. It has application instructions for the applicants as well as the letter writers, because they will be coming on to this page. So first step is you click request document down here, and that will bring you to a second page. And you just put individually for your 2 letter writers, you'll put their first, last name, email, and then requested by date. And you can put whatever date you want. Obviously no later than the deadline of February 18th, but you can give them an earlier date if you choose. And then you can also upload 1 file. So it could be your CV or whatever you feel is appropriate, and then send requests. And you'll do that again for the second letter writer. And what's really nice again about this software application is that you have record of what you've done. So if you go back to the previous page, that first page of the letter recommendation, it'll show you what you've done. So this is an example, oops, sorry. This is an example, I sent it to myself. So it says who I sent it to, the date that I gave myself as the deadline. You'll see the task status. So it'll say not read, read, started, because I clicked on the link that was provided. If they say they didn't get it, then you can resend it here. And then you can even delete a person where they are no longer allowed to provide a letter recommendation if needed. So that's for that EC grant help. If you have any other questions, again, please let me know. Oh, Phyllis, you have a question?
No, I just want to make a point, and that is that the use of EC grant for your letters of recommendation is how we're going to actually process them and receive them. It should by no means be the only way that you request the letters. You need to not expect that someone's going to want to write a letter because they got the request from EC grant. You need to call them. And this is just the operational part of your requesting your letter. Yes, so make sure that you are personal, that you contact either by email or phone the person that you should know them well enough to be able to contact them. And this is just the process by which they submit the letters. And if they hate the whole idea, they can send it to me directly, and I'll make sure it gets into the system. All right, thanks, Leah.
Thank you. That was very important. Thank you. Okay, so this slide is really important. It's the timeline. So we know the deadline is February 18th. All applications are due to the local Sea Grant program. So for California, we have 2. And so for both of ours, it'll be 5 p.m. Pacific time. It'll be due by. We highly recommend you give yourself time, 1 month, even up to 2 months time to complete this application process, to allow to have any of your questions answered and if you run into any problems. Once you submit your application in spring 2022, our Sea Grant program, along with everyone else, will be interviewing the application to be selecting the finalists. Then we have to submit those finalists to the National Sea Grant Office by April 1st. So for the finalists that get sent to the Sea Grant Office, they will know their status if they are selected by June 2022. And after that, in October 2022, could lead into January 2023 because the dates aren't selected yet, but there will be a placement week where the finalists will be selected to be interviewed to find their host office in DC. And then you'll start your fellowship on February 1st, 2023. So this is just a slide, a couple slides to show examples of current and past fellows with USC Sea Grant. We have 4 years. I have 2022, 2021, and the next slide is 2020 and 2019. You'll see, I won't go through all this right now because you'll get this, but you can just glance and see that we have a varying amount of fellows selected from the national office. We can submit 6 and then they decide. So sometimes we'll have more than others, just depending on their review process. We also have a lot of different varying schools that are represented and placements in offices. Most are executive branch, but you'll see in the next slide, we have one that is legislative. We also have out-of-state students that are represented. We have Catherine with Arizona State. And then we have on the next slide, we have Rachel with Utah State, and then Larissa with the University of Arizona. So if you are out of state, by all means, please apply, because there is room that we have the out of state people represented, as well as if you want to be legislative, although there are less spots for that, it's still represented. And we can see that Andrea just a couple years ago was in the legislative branch. And actually one of our panelists, Charlotte, was also in the legislative branch. So she has a unique perspective that she can share there. So you can go on our website and look at even years previous than 2019 to look at any of the information on our fellows. Amelia mentioned that the National Sea Grant Office has a lot of resources, and this is where I have listed them all here. These are all hyperlinked right here that you can go on. They have a student guide, they have more tips and tricks. This is really cool. Their blog, where current and past fellows have written about their experiences. You have alumni that share their stories, and they even have a Canals Fellowship 101 webinar that is way more informative for the whole process that you can listen to there. The only one that I don't have a link for is their office hours. You have to go to this email or Gmail account right here to figure out who to contact for that. But this is actually their next one is tonight from 7 to 9 Eastern. And they also have December 16th and January 18th. So those are opportunities to talk to current fellows, to ask questions. And then this is the last PowerPoint slide, but I just want to show 3 additional fellowships outside of Knauss. We have the NOAA Coastal Management and Digital Coast Fellowships. Those 2 fellowships are 2-year fellowships that are, the application period is open until the end of January 21st. And this is open to all US students who are completing a master's or other advanced degree. Then we have the Joint National Marine Fisheries Office Sea Grant Fellowship, and that is also open until January 27th for PhD students in a related field for up to 3 years of funding. And then the last one is the California Sea Grant State Fellowship. And this state fellowship is modeled after the Canals Fellowship, except it's focused on policy in California instead. And this is the only one out of these 3 that is not currently open. They do their application deadline in the summer. So for those who are eligible, it's very similar. It's the same eligibility as the Canals Fellowship. So if you are still eligible for next year summer, then definitely look into that. And these are all hyperlinked to go to all of their websites. And then we also have the California Sea Grant program coordinator, who would be your contact for that, Nick Saderpour. So I have his information down there. So, okay, so now we're going to move into the panels section of our webinar. So we're excited. We have 4 panelists. We have 2 that are current USC Sea Grant employees, and then 2 that were USC Sea Grant fellows. So we have a nice mix. We have Charlotte Stevenson, 2006 fellow with, again, I mentioned she was a legislative branch placement with the House of Representatives Natural Resources Committee. We have Madison Harris, who was a USC Sea Grant fellow in 2019 with a executive branch placement with NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service. We have Amelia Almada, who is, Charlotte is our science writer, and Amelia is our science research and policy specialist. And so she had the executive branch in 2016 with National Ocean Service. And then Larissa Lee was a USC Sea Grant fellow in 2019 as well, with the executive branch placement also with NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get off our slides, and we have our panelists pinned, or we're going to pin them to the front. And what we're going to do is we're going to go around and ask everyone the same questions and just kind of get a little bit more information and perspective from each of our panelists on describe your fellowship a little bit more and your placement, explain your big takeaways you want to share and want everyone to know about. And then you can, if you want to talk about how it has influenced your career path. So let's start. We can work from left to right. So we can start with Charlotte.
All right. Thanks, Leah. Yeah, as Leah mentioned, it kind of feels like it was a really long time ago for me, 2006. but I was a legislative fellow, House of Representatives, Natural Resources Committee, Subcommittee on Fisheries, Wildlife and Oceans, Democratic side, which was the minority that year. And that's an important distinction because there, at least my year, there was a Republican side that had fellows for that committee. And both sides were really explicit about asking about your political views and leanings. And I'm just noting that because it's something to consider when you consider maybe legislative or executive placement, whether you're comfortable in a partisan environment like that. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that later. So it was a congressional election year that year in 2006. And so the House flipped. And so we went from minority to majority, bigger offices, more staff. And so I was able to be hired in 2007, and I worked with the committee for another year. Then I came out to LA and worked for Heal the Bay for a couple years, and then transitioned to being like a contract freelance science writer, which is what I've been for the last 10, 11 years. And one of my best contracts is with USC Sea Grant. So that's been my pleasure. Other places I've worked, California Ocean Science Trust, Scripps, down in San Diego, and other publications. I would say the fellowship is one of the best things that I've ever had the honor to do. It's definitely a door opener, a lot of connections, a lot of referrals. It gave me an invaluable perspective on how science is used and not used at the highest decision-making levels. It's definitely the legislative side of it. You really get to see how the sausage is made, which I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it's something I really wanted to see and experience. And I think it's really helped my ability to write and talk to people from a lot of different perspectives in the overlapping realms of science, policy, and politics. The other thing I would note is on the subcommittee, I ended up working on the reauthorization of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Act. I don't know, it has some long name. That's what I did that year. And I have no fisheries background. I was background in toxicology. So that's also something to consider in the legislative offices. You're going to work on whatever that office is working on that year. But, you know, if you're someone who's like, you know, I only want to work on coral reefs, then NOAA, you know, one of the NOAA offices might be a better fit for you, but you really won't have as much of a choice in the legislative offices as to what you are going to work on. Okay, I'm going to be quiet.
Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, so let's go to Maddie now.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie Harris, and thank you so much, Leah, for the invitation. And hi to everyone on the line. I'm glad to see there's a lot of interest. Phyllis, it's good to see you again. Really glad to be connected with USC Sea Grant still, and excited about the new round of interested applicants. So again, I'm Maddie. I was a Knauss Fellow in 2019. Prior to that, I went through a master's program for a Master's of Environmental Science and Management at UC Santa Barbara. And I did go to USC for undergrad, which is why I also like being connected with USC Sea Grant. For my fellowship, I was on the executive side, so working at a federal agency, specifically at NOAA, and then within NOAA, because as some of you might be familiar, NOAA is a really big agency that covers everything from weather to coastlines. I was in the fisheries line office, and specifically I was doing international affairs, and it's the job that I continue to have today. So one of the kind of first things off the bat that I only completed the fellowship a few years ago, but it's already impacted my career trajectory because, of course, I was really fortunate to and had good timing to be hired by the office where I was placed for my fellowship. So I've continued to learn and grow into a role that's really exciting and interesting to me. And like Charlotte mentioned, I had no background in what I currently do now, which I think is one of the not only professional benefits, but maybe personal excitements about exciting things about the fellowship is that it does open a lot of doors, and it can open a lot of odd, unexpected new doors, because inherently in the placement process, if you're selected, you get the opportunity, particularly on the executive side, to sit down and basically have a really quick job interview with, you know, a half dozen different federal agencies on a topic or a subject that you have never heard of before, didn't study in grad school, but literally that door is open to you because you've already been selected as a fellowship, and that's part of the placement process. So that's how I kind of walked my way backwards into international fisheries diplomacy, and it's been a really fascinating learning experience. So I maybe will stop there, but I'm looking forward to hopefully answering some questions.
Great, thank you, Maddie. Okay, let's move on to Amelia.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Amelia. I'm currently a science research and policy specialist at USC Sea Grant. I applied for the Knauss in my last year of my PhD at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on the East Coast. So I was a 2015 Canals Fellow, which feels a while ago as well. I worked in a headquarters policy office at NOAA, specifically the Policy and Constituent Affairs Division at the National Ocean Service. I really enjoyed being in a headquarters office because we were exposed to a lot of different kinds of topics and type of work. A good mix of really deep dives into thematic projects, and then also responsibility of rapid turnaround projects, since we engage with Congress and with the headquarters office of NOAA. A lot of hierarchy there, which is really interesting to observe. For myself, I was involved in NOAA's Arctic team. I helped coordinate the Cross NOAA Arctic team, which was really exciting. This was the year that President Obama went up to Alaska and had his climate change summit. So a lot of work around that, and writing of talking points for President Obama, which is basically one of my highlights in my life to date. And a lot of other work on the national ocean policy, harmful algal blooms, and a lot of writing for Congress. In terms of key takeaways from my fellowship at NOAA, I really came to appreciate how implementation, this transition from gathering information we need and actually doing something to have an impact, the implementation is really an art and a science in itself. And at NOAA was really the first time I was able to see the inner workings of an organization focused on creating new knowledge through research, but also digesting best available science and making something of that. I just was really fascinated to see the machinery of it all, which as an academic hadn't really been exposed to before. So, just really seeing that at NOAA, even if we have the best available science, if we can communicate it well or come up with ideas for how to move forward to act on this information, or even how to measure how we were doing and implementing things, it's really couldn't make progress. So in terms of how the Knauss affected my career path, the Knauss was pivotal for me to think about what I wanted to do next. I knew I didn't want to continue in academia at that time and in the area I had been doing, but I really observed that I was interested more in this program management, the implementation side of executing on best available science. So I moved into a program management position for about 5 years, which was a really valuable experience after that. But I also learned about the Sea Grant program at the time and the work that that Sea Grant does in each coastal state. So it became a dream of mine to work at a Sea Grant program, and I feel really fortunate to have started in my current position at USC Sea Grant about 3 months ago. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. And last but not least, Larissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larissa Lee. I was also a 2019 Executive Fellow at NOAA in NMFS, the National Marine Fisheries Service, in the Office of Habitat Conservation in the Restoration Center within that office. And that was a specialty of mine in my master's. I did study fish habitat use, so it seemed to apply, but in my fellowship year, my main task was to look at socioeconomic benefits of habitat restoration. So that was something that was pretty new to me, and figuring out how, as an office, we could monitor those benefits and then communicate those out. That was a big part of my fellowship. And as far as career paths, it definitely determined my career path. I'm still in that office, except I'm in their Seattle location. So now I get to work on more localized habitat restoration projects, which is something I really love to work on. So so definitely affected my career path. And as far as like a typical day or what to take advantage of with Knauss, I really loved that there wasn't really a typical day. That, you know, of course, every day is gathering information and synthesizing that information, but that could be through meetings with other people at NOAA, with other agencies, you know, doing your own computer research, and communicating that out to either the public or to higher ups. So that was really exciting, and advice would just be to take advantage of all of those opportunities. I got to take on some responsibilities of our policy analyst while she was on maternity leave, or you know, go to events on the Hill. So there are just so many opportunities to take advantage of, and I think that was one of my favorite parts. And another just piece I'll add was that I got to, and I think Maddie also got to, live in houses in DC with other fellows. And that was such a valuable experience, especially for me as an executive fellow, to live with 2 legislative fellows, to really get to come home at the end of the day and talk about what you were doing. And, you know, those have become friends and colleagues that I still spend a lot of time with. So I'll end there.
Awesome. Thanks, Larissa. Well, that was amazing hearing all of your perspectives and experiences, and thank you so much. So we are going to continue the discussion for the last 10 minutes or so. We're going to bring Phyllis up here, so it'll be us 6, and we're going to do our Q&A. So the way that we're going to start this is I'm just going to start with a question that has been asked in registration. And for all of you, there's a couple options. You can ask, if you have any questions, ask it in the chat and I can read it off. Or if you'd like to ask it yourself, just raise your hand and then I can call on you and you can ask it. So think about what you would want to ask, or if there's any outstanding questions as we start our first question. So again, this was a question that was asked from the registration. So it is, and I think we kind of touched on it, where is this good to expand on, but what are some more tips on creating the best application possible? Like, are there any other tips you guys have that you really want everyone to know? Or do you think we covered it pretty good?
Maddie, go for it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I should have asked Leah if we should raise our hands or not, or just.
Oh yeah, no,
in.
but you guys just, you can talk. It's fine.
Okay, sorry. So one piece of advice that I thought was really helpful, and I'll offer it. I don't know the background of all the folks on the call today, but I think it's helpful to keep in mind, and this was alluded to a few different times, that you're kind of going to be a fish in a big pond with these applications. There's not only folks from all over the state applying, but all over the country, coming from tons of different programs, with PhDs, with masters, with JDs. And I think it's helpful to think about yourself maybe on a spectrum of where your current experience and background is relative to what the program is looking for, which Phyllis has talked about, is kind of at the intersection of policy and science and management. And so I came from a really policy heavy interdisciplinary program, which is very different than your typical PhD experience where someone has spent years designing their own studies and doing field work and research and writing papers and presenting, and that's one type of applicant. And I was all the way over here as someone who is kind of in a bit more of a unique interdisciplinary master's program. And so the advice that I received was to, I had kind of like the policy management experience really well represented in my resume, because that's just the work that I've been doing and what my focus in grad school and my thesis was on. And so I really made an effort to, in other parts of my application, demonstrate either through words or examples or any other type of experience that I could draw on the parts of maybe the more research that I've done, different classes I had taken, my interest and passion for science, even though it wasn't reflected the same way as it would be if I had 5 years of work under a PhD to show for. And so I think it's helpful to think of where are your natural strengths going to come through really well, and where are places where you want to amplify the other aspects of this kind of holistic experience in another part of your application.
Awesome.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it was great. You guys want to chime in, or do you want me to move on to another question? We have a couple that came in. Move on. Okay, so this question is, does the Knauss Fellowship provide networking opportunities between fellows from different offices? And then follow up to that is, how has this changed with COVID?
I can answer the first part of the question. I don't know how it's changed with COVID, but I would say half of what you're doing is networking in some ways when you're there. So lots of opportunities.
The national office makes a point of kind of constructing every year's Knauss Fellow class as a cohort. When it's in person before the COVID time, and I'm sure, within a relatively short period of time, they have activities for fellows. They've had some online activities for our fellows working remotely. It's very important to develop that network, and so they nurture it. You have a lot of opportunities to interact with people. And in fact, even before, if you're selected as a fellow, we submit our nominees, and then there's a selection process. And if you're selected as a fellow, even then, before you go to DC for the matching workshop, which I like to call speed dating, you're encouraged to get to know some of the other fellows, because it's a good way to find housing, and as Larissa said, some shared housing in DC is a real advantage. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I think that's one of the main features of this fellowship.
Awesome.
I'll quickly just say on the note about COVID, my example to provide is I still live in shared housing with former and current fellows. So one of my housemates is actually a 2021 fellow, and he has had a really great and valuable experience. And there's a mix this year of fellows that have moved to DC and fellows that have not. I think that has provided a network for those that are here, but also all of the kind of virtual networking resources exist and are available to fellows who didn't move to DC. And I will just flag that nothing is certain, but federal agencies are hoping to have folks start coming back into the office in the new calendar year, and folks that work on the Hill have already been back in their offices for several months now. So might be helpful when considering looking to 2023 that, well, I don't have a mirror ball, but.
That was actually a question, is are people going back to the office or not yet for that? So thank you, that was helpful. Okay, another question is, Can you think of any common mistakes that students make in applications and how to avoid them? Not on like following directions, but just in the strength of their statements and application materials?
I'll take that too. You know, one of the things that seems, so from year to year, we don't know who's on the selection committee. And in a couple of cases that I can just think of offhand, when somebody's, obviously, when you write your personal statement, you're going to, you know, to talk about your interest in environment and the ocean and coastal policy and everything like that. But be careful about being too much of an advocate. Because I've seen some of the, you know, we get the panel reviews, and sometimes people have shot themselves in the foot. And in one case, I made a suggestion to someone that she sort of temper her, and this was, you know, within the past 5 years, that she sort of temper what she was saying. And she said, you know, I don't want to. If they don't want me because I have these feelings, then that's how it is. But I will say this. In the Sea Grant legislation and in appropriations and in reauthorization, the Knauss program plays a really big role. It's really important to Congress. In fact, it's so important that one of the additions to the Sea Grant reauthorization was a statement saying that the Canals Fellows should be assigned fairly, both to Republicans and Democrats on the Hill. And so there's a really strong interest in, on the part of Congress in the Sea Grant Knauss Fellowship program. And of course, there can be 6 applicants from each program, and they're all over the country. So their political views are going to be very diverse. But that's pretty much the only mistake you can make, other than bad writing, not proofreading, and those kinds of mistakes. When they're reviewing applications, you guys represent the sort of really top level of student, you know, graduate students matriculating into the policy world. And so that competition is really, really stiff. And sometimes they look at the tiniest things. So just, I think Amelia said this, proofread, have people read your statements, make sure they're strong. And you should be good.
Great. Laura, I can ask one more question and then we're at the hour. This one is, what is the likelihood of getting placed into an applicant's desired position? And if you don't get into that position, are you able to use the Knauss Fellowship to provide connections to get potentially with that office that was desired originally later down the road? So that's a yes, you can?
Yeah, I can jump in there. Just that, yes, you can definitely continue to talk with your office. We had opportunities to meet with them, even if you don't end up working for that office. And I think that as far as what are your chances of getting your top choice, you know, there are so many different applicants and different interests throughout the fellowship class that I think a lot of people do end up getting at least, you know, pretty high on their list because of the way the system works. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, that sounds, oh, do you have something, Amelia?
I was just going to say, just to note too, that placements change each year as well. So there won't necessarily be the same availability in the legislative or executive branch. There's different offices that come up each year, speaking to Phyllis's point about being equitable and who can get a Knauss Fellow. And I think just be really open. You might not realize that an office that you interview for is actually really of interest until you go. So just keep an open mind, especially beyond your kind of area of expertise. There might be something that actually becomes really compelling. I also want to note too, to convey to everyone that please don't reach out to potential placement offices. and until kind of you're post that interview phase. So they're very strict to be sure that there's no legs up or advantage in terms of the placement. So if you have questions about placement and how that works, just be in touch with us when it comes up.
Great, thank you. And I want to be mindful of time. It's already 1:02, but I know we have Phyllis, you had a couple other things to say. Thank you all for answering the Q&A questions. And for those of you who have any other questions, please feel free, that we did not answer today, please feel free to email Amelia or me or Phyllis, and we can be sure to help answer your questions, whatever you have. So Phyllis, did you have some?
Yeah, just a few things to wind up with. First of all, we welcome all of your applications, and we're really excited that that you were participated in this webinar. It's really the first time we've done this in this way, and so we're really gratified to have so much interest. And I just note a small note that I think you're all females, so women power. I just also want to stress that if you apply and if you're selected by our program to go forward, we're going to ask you during your interview about your commitment to this, because it's not a good thing if we nominate 6 people plus our out-of-state people, and somebody gets picked and then they decide to do something else. And Larissa and Maddie both know that I say this kind of repeatedly. Then we're losing a slot. And so when you're developing your application, please think seriously about this opportunity. This is if you get it, is a wonderful opportunity. It really can't be equaled. The California Sea Grant, the state policy fellowship is a really, really good program if you're interested in moving into state government, but it isn't this. When you serve as a California State Fellow, you work for an agency and you really become part of the workforce of that agency. And this is very different. It carries with it a whole different sort of level of opportunity. And finally, once you're our fellow, we want you to become part of us. We're very possessive. We want to keep track of you. We want to know where you end up. We'll kind of bug you. Leah will bug you to write blogs and everything like that. We have 2 past fellows here, so that's testament to the fact that we really want you to stay in touch with us. We can, after your fellowship, I mean, both Charlotte and Amelia were Canals Fellows, but they weren't fellows who were nominated by our program. So it is an amazing opportunity to network if this is the field that you want to be in. And this is such an important field, and it is becoming more and more important all the time as we face really, really nasty problems, the ugly problems that only you guys and people like you can help us solve for society. So thank you all so much for spending the time with us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Maddie, Larissa, Charlotte, Amelia, for your panel. It was wonderful and answering all your questions. I'm going to share, I have just a contact slide one more time, just for the last slide. Again, so if you guys want to check out our website or learn more information about the Knauss Fellowship, those are 2 links there. And then there's Phyllis and Amelia's emails as well. And again, just please reach out if you have any questions at all, and we're happy to help. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.